So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Policy Insights webinar on getting ready for pensions dashboards. My name's James Walsh. I'm the Head of Membership Engagement here at the PLSA, and it's a pleasure for me to host this and to welcome you. The purpose of this series of Policy Insights webinars is really all about highlighting the good work that our own PLSA policy team does on our members' behalf to represent your views and concerns to government and regulators. And it's also about helping you, our members, prepare for future regulatory developments, policy challenges, and so on. And the fact we've got 300 plus people, 302, I believe, registered for this webinar just shows the level of interest, of course, in pensions dashboards. We know members are looking for more information, perhaps more clarity to help them prepare. Hopefully we can answer some of that in the next 55 minutes. We know there's been a reset. We're going to hear a bit more about that. That raises questions about the timetable, but we'll also be focusing a lot on the other things that schemes can be doing to get ready for dashboards. So the plan for this morning is that we've got three speakers. I'll get them to introduce themselves in just a moment. Each of them is going to give us a very short slide presentation. We'll take some questions after each of those presentations. So not just at the end, so questions after each one. So do type your questions into the Q&A box or comments in the chat box. I'll be scanning that. And after those presentations and questions, we'll have another all singing, all dancing round of questions at the end. And we'll finish at 11:55. We will circulate the slides and the recording, and we'll publish the recording on our website. And just so you know, just like a PLSA conference, this isn't a confidential or Chatham House rules type event. We'll publish a recording, as I say, and we do have at least one freelance journalist in the audience, so just to bear that in mind. Right, rather than have me introduce the speakers, I'm going to ask each of them to take 30 seconds each right at the start to say who they are, and give a very quick summary of what the area is they're going to be covering today. And I'm going to start with my colleague, Richard Smith. Richard.
Thank you, James. Hello, everyone. Great to be with you. My name's Richard Smith. I'm the PLSA's Pensions Dashboards Consultant. I've been providing part-time specialist dashboard support to Nigel Peoples' PLSA policy team for the last 2 years, mainly helping formulate PLSA's policy responses to the various dashboards consultations that there have been. And those are what I'll be highlighting this morning, updating you on PLSA's key messages and where everything's up to. Chris.
Right. Thanks, Richard. 30 seconds, perfect. And we've also got Chris Curry. Chris, good morning to you.
Good morning, James, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. Delighted to have this opportunity to speak to the PLSA membership again. It's always a pleasure. So my name's Chris Curry. I'm principal of the Pensions Dashboards programme. We are responsible for delivering the ecosystem, the technical parts of the infrastructure for pensions dashboards, working in close conjunction with our partners in the regulators in the DWP and of course in industry to make pensions dashboards a reality in the UK. And I'm just going to be providing an update on where we are on the programme in light of, as you mentioned, the reset and the written ministerial statement.
Thanks, Chris. Look forward to that. And our third speaker is going to be Angela Bell. Angela, good morning.
Thanks, James. I'm delighted to be here this morning. I lead the industry engagement work stream at the pensions regulator, and that's one of 4 key work streams, the others being policy, communications and operational design. The focus of my slides today are going to look much more closely at data. So what schemes should be considering when looking at getting their data ready for dashboards and where to go for support. And I'm also going to touch on our approach to compliance and enforcement and touch on some of the key risks that trustees should be considering.
Great, excellent. So thanks for those quick summaries. It's really helpful. So let's get into our first main session, and that's with Richard. Richard, over to you.
Thank you, James. I think I will just take control of the slides. Talking about dashboards quite a lot over the last several years, I've consistently found that one picture really helps explain the whole system. And is the latest iteration of that picture, which I've pinched from moneyhub.com. As you can see, it's quite busy. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to build it up layer by layer highlighting PLSA's key policy positions in each layer. But there's no way in the time available I can cover all points, of course, though. So if you'd like the full detail, please do visit the PLSA's Pensions Dashboards Policy Hub on the PLSA website, where you'll find lots of helpful materials, and including all of our consultation responses on dashboards going right back to 2019. You'll notice my email address is there as well. If you've got questions, not just today, but going forward right through the year, please do get in touch. If you've got a question, it's likely you won't be the only PLSA member scheme or firm with that question. And it's really useful for us at PLSA to know the areas in which PLSA members are looking for further support. So, right, to the ecosystem, right down, starting at the bottom, layer 7. This represents the requirement on all schemes to make their data digitally searchable. If you like, the regulation of data provision. There are several parts to this. DWP consulted on dashboards regulations last year and published final regulations which came into force just before Christmas. Supporting the DWP regulations are PDP standards. They were originally published nearly 2.5 years ago now. And alongside the data standards, there are PDP connection, technical and reporting standards. And final initial versions of all these PDP standards were published by PDP in November, all accessible obviously on the PDP website. These standards will keep changing forever, of course, as dashboards develop, with major changes coming every year in October and more minor changes every 6 months in April and October. In terms of PLSA's position, we were broadly supportive of both DWP's and PDP's proposals. But our main point that I think we made in every consultation response is there really must be very thorough, extensive user testing of the data standards, and all the standards, in fact, to ensure that savers, your members, can really understand the pension information they're seeing on dashboards. Next is the Financial Reporting Council. If you think about 2 or more defined contribution, DC, pension incomes appearing next to each other on a dashboard, for parity, they really need to be projected on the same basis. So the FRC consulted last year on a new consistent version of the DC projection rules, and that's coming into force from this October onwards. On this, though, PLSA was less supportive. We have reservations at PLSA about FRC's method for projecting future DC growth. And we don't agree with their basis for converting projected pots to projected incomes. Once again, what we want to see is detailed user testing to see what users really make of all this. The pensions regulator is engaging with industry to help schemes prepare with their new duties, for example, by speaking on webinars like this today. Thank you, Angela. I won't steal Angela's thunder, but in summary, PLSA is very supportive of the pragmatic approach to scheme compliance that TPR is proposing to take. Finally, because dashboards also show personal pensions, the FCA has made parallel handbook rules which mirror the DWP regulations applying to trust-based and public service pension schemes. All those requirements to make your data digitally searchable are already in place and are settled. The only one outstanding thing is the revised deadline dates by when that must be done. And Chris, as he said, will talk a little bit about that reset. All those requirements apply to an umbrella term that I use, pension arrangements, meaning pension schemes and pension providers. And as I said, PLSA has been working hard behind the scenes on all of this. As I say, please do have a look at the PLSA Dashboards Hub. There's an explanatory video there that we launched at last year's annual conference, and a recording of last year's PLSA Dashboards webinar, which featured the first public demonstration of what a pensions dashboard might actually look like. Many insurers who are members of the ABI are also business members of the PLSA, and I know a number of you are watching today, and it's great to have you with us. Layer 5, all schemes and providers must choose how to connect into the dashboards ecosystem. Some data providers are building their own technical connections, but many, or perhaps most, are buying the services of what's known as an integrated service provider, or ISP. Here we're showing just the 7 alpha data providers who connected in test last year, but in the fullness of time, of course, the whole industry will be connected, except of course for very small schemes. I think there are now somewhere between 15 and 20 ISP firms to service schemes and providers, so it's a really vibrant market. Now, PLSA is also really helping in this space, publishing a range of really helpful practical guidance to help schemes and ISPs. Angela and I both attend the PLSA Dashboards Working Group, so happy to take questions on that as appropriate. And of course, it's the PLSA Annual Conference on Tuesday week, and we'll be talking more about that guidance there. All ISPs, data providers, connect into the central digital architecture components operated by PDP, that's Chris's team. I won't say any more about this layer because Chris is here and can provide any updates as required on this core layer. Now, have you noticed we're quite a long way into it and we haven't mentioned dashboards yet? Let's correct that. A key message I'd want you all to take away from this session this morning is that providing a pensions dashboard is a highly regulated activity. And that again has got many parts. WP's regulations put many requirements on dashboard providers, such as, for example, having to undergo an independent compliance audit every year. HM Treasury is shortly going to be adding provision of a dashboard to the list of regulated activities in the regulated activities order. And in anticipation of that, FCA consulted over Christmas on the detailed regulatory framework for operators of pensions dashboards, and PDP consulted in parallel on draft design standards, which define how all dashboards must look the same. Now, PLSA on those consultations was very supportive of that high bar that's being set for dashboard operators, as we think this will really help mitigate the risks of potential consumer harm. Although there was some concern amongst some PLSA members that this high bar could potentially limit the dashboard provider market and potential innovation, which would benefit savers. FCA and PDP have said they'll publish their final responses to those consultations in the summer of this year. Nearly there now. Layer 2, how many dashboards will there be? Well, we know there'll be at least one. There'll be the government's money helper dashboard from MAPS, but this isn't a regulated dashboard, although it will largely follow all the standards that I've just mentioned. How many regulated dashboards will there be? Well, that's the question. So far, we've had Lloyds Bank saying at Hymans Robertson's conference in January that they'll definitely be putting a pension dashboard on their banking app. I love that idea. Just me, for example, I've been a Lloyds Bank customer for nearly 40 years, and I'm really looking forward to being able to see my state pension and all my workplace pensions and my personal pension all together on my Lloyds banking app. Money Hub have also said they'll be applying to the FCA to become a regulated dashboard provider. And on the right-hand side there, expect, I think, more and more providers, be they pension providers, master trusts, banks, others, to announce that they will be doing dashboards for their customers and members. Some may build their own, but I think it's because it's going to be quite regulated. Many will look to white label the technology of fintech firms like Money Hub and others, represented, of course, by the Open Banking Association FData. Finally, the most important people at the very top, all of your pension scheme and active members, with an average of about 4 pensions. Which dashboard do we think they'll choose to use? What do we think their overall dashboard experience will be like? What do we think they'll want to do next? Lots and lots of questions, and lots of work to do with these layers, which really comes back to that user testing I was mentioning earlier. But layers 1, 2, and 3, I think, are really for another day. Today, we're very much focused on what schemes can and should be doing right now in layers 5 and 6 with their ISPs. And Chris and Angela will be focusing on that. That's me done, James.
Thanks, Richard. That's a great way to get us started. And I can see that in the chat, my colleagues have posted links to some of the key sources of further information on this. You mentioned, Richard, our own PLSA dashboards area of our website, but also the regulators dashboards area as well. So always a good source of information. We're open for questions, so I'm looking for questions to come into the Q&A box. Do fire those in, and I'll put them to our speakers. But just while we're waiting for that, Richard, I mean, just one for me. You focus quite a bit there on, I think it was level 5, about the different ways in which schemes can connect to dashboards. I mean, how should schemes sort of go about taking that decision on which method they should employ to connect? Have you any advice or guidance on that?
Well, it'll vary very much by scheme, and Angela will touch on this, because the connection decision is really a key part of what schemes need to do. But if I just give a flavour of what we're seeing in the market, I mean, many schemes have outsourced their administration to a third-party administrator, a TPA, and they should really be engaging with that TPA. But what the TPA's plan is to connect their schemes data, and many of those organisations are contracting or discussing with potential ISPs to connect their data. So other schemes are administered in-house. In that case, those schemes might be wishing to have direct conversations with integrated service provider firms and potentially doing a procurement. At the sort of pension provider end of the market, if you will, those organisations might have perhaps more heft and used to doing their own digital developments. They may well be building their own, without getting too technical, application programming interface, API, technical connections into the ecosystem. So I think there's a range of options, and it really depends on your current delivery method of your administration service to your members or customers.
Thanks, Richard. And I can see the questions are now starting to flood in. So before we go on to Chris, let's just have a couple more quick ones to you. One question is, other countries that have similar dashboards have gone down the single dashboard route. What's the benefit of having more than one dashboard? Well,
there's a range of research that's been done on this, and the headline is finding your pensions on apps you already use and trust. So I tell my own story all the time. I've got a well-trusted relationship with a banking app I use, not every day, but probably several times a week. I think Lloyds have said the average usage is 26 times a month. So there's a frequency there. It's also frictionless. It's not painful, is it? You know, I already use it, and also it's free. There's not a cost there. Of course, dashboards will have to be free. So it's really trying to get people's awareness of the pensions they've got in as many different places as possible, always displayed in the same way, but really trying to roll out this awareness of people's pensions in trusted relationships that they may already have with their apps from their pension provider, bank, or other provider.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Just one more. Will the state pension show GMPs, guaranteed minimum pensions, as a separate component? And our questioner says, thinking about GMP rectification stroke equalisation and how the state figure may differ to the scheme's figure. Any thoughts on that?
No GMPs are, the state pension will be shown. Is it called the contracting out element? There will be some notes about that. There is one final element we do need to get added to that picture. DWP, not the regulations making part of DWP, but DWP, state pension provider, will be publishing some guidance about how state pension must be displayed on all dashboards, including subtleties and complications, for example, GMP and contracting out considerations.
Okay, thank you. So a bit more detail to come on that.
Cool.
Richard, thank you. We'll give you a little rest at that point. Thank you. And I'm going to turn to Chris. Chris, you're going to give us an update on the reset and what you've been working on, please. Over to you.
Thanks very much, James, and thank you, Richard. Really good, comprehensive overview of the whole system, as ever, I think. But delighted to be here today. As I mentioned earlier, I want to give you all just a quick update on where we are on the programme, really to build on something which I'm sure most of you will have seen, the written ministerial statement that was published last month, as it was now back in March. And to just let you know what that means for the programme going forward, but also what it means for the sort of things that you can be doing as data and pension providers as well going forward, and also to hear any questions or concerns that people might have and investigate further what that might mean for the programme overall. But before I get into the written ministerial statement, I just wanted to emphasise one thing that probably is the key message that I'd like everyone to take away from the session today, is that we are clear, and actually it does link into the written ministerial statement, that the pensions minister is very clear that the Pensions Minister, the Department for Work and Pensions, the Money and Pension Service, the Pensions Dashboards Programme, and thankfully in response to the written ministerial statement, the industry have all, I think, re-emphasised their commitment to producing pensions dashboards in the UK. So this is very much a kind of a holding pattern we're in at the moment. It's not a significant change to the overall approach towards pensions dashboards. It's not saying that pensions dashboards won't happen. It's just saying that we need to make sure that pensions dashboards happen in the right way. So everybody involved in the programme and involved in the delivery of pensions dashboards is just as committed now as they always have been to making sure that pensions dashboards do come into existence in the UK. So if we could just move on to the next slide, please. I just want to talk a little bit about the written ministerial statement. So that, as I said, that came out earlier in March, and it outlined some changes to the mandatory connection deadlines for pension providers. So the bits in the towards the bottom of that kind of chart, which Richard was showing about the legislation that's being set, because the deadlines for pension providers, the staging profile, as it was called technically, was set out in legislation and is still in that legislation which has been passed. But the statement that was published explains that the Pensions Dashboards Programme, the organisation that I work with, is not able to meet those connection deadlines as set out in the legislation. In particular, the first of those deadlines, the staging window, was due to open this month in April and to run through to August the 31st. And so we thought it was important to let people know that that was no longer going to be a deadline that they would be held to. A little bit of background on that. So as I'm sure you're aware, delivering pensions dashboards is a very complex undertaking. It involves the connection of thousands of pension schemes and millions of member records. So there's a lot for us as an organisation in P2P to be delivering, but also a lot for the industry to be preparing for in order for those to work well. And our overriding priority in the work that we're doing with the industry to set up the connections for pensions dashboards is to make sure that it's carried out in a way that is safe, that is secure, that works well for the pensions industry and ultimately works well for scheme members. As Richard said, the ones at the top of that pyramid are the most important to us, and so making sure that pensions dashboards work well for consumers is really important. So we are one of the biggest government digital programs at the moment, and one of the questions we're always asked is why the delay? And there were several factors which have contributed, I think. So we've had to take slightly longer than we'd hoped for to provide necessary updates to the central digital architecture. We've been doing some testing, and obviously one of the points of testing is to highlight things that aren't working so well. So we want to make sure that we can correct those and help those going forward. I think as any other major IT program in the past 12 months has found, the availability of specialist technicians and those people working in that IT space and that development space, there is a shortage of skills. And I think on a competitive basis, the public sector is not necessarily in as good a position to compete as the private sector for those types of individuals. And so that means that we have not been running at full capacity in those areas as part of the programme. And so that means that the kind of some of the work that we've needed to do in order to make sure that we're ready to work with industry is now behind time. And so it wasn't going to be ready in time to do that. So we need to make sure that we can get those resources in place and get that work done properly. And as I mentioned, we've been doing testing. We have connected up some of our public sector partners, so the Money Helper Dashboard and the state pension team at the DWP, as Richard was mentioning. As part of that, we put them through some of our initial connection processes, and we've learned a lot through that. And so we're now improving those connection processes to make sure that when we open it up to the private sector, it works very, very well. But the upshot is that we're not in a position to be able to meet that original kind of first cohort staging deadline of the end of August as set out in the regulations and in the FCA rules. So we're now working very closely with the Department for Work and Pensions and both sets of regulators, the FCA and the TPR, to work out what the right new and achievable plan is to deliver and what the new timelines are going to be. I'll have to say now, right at the outset, that I cannot tell you and I do not know what that new timeline will be at the moment. So we don't know when we'll be inviting that first cohort back in for the connection. to go through, and that's part of the reset work that we're doing that you alluded to earlier, James, and that it was also announced in the written ministerial statement. So we're taking the opportunity now to kind of do a thorough overview of what we're doing in the programme and how we're delivering the programme to make sure that it does have kind of the best chance of success, has all the right components in all the right places, and to make sure that we do that. Because as we found when we made the announcement, the response from industry was overwhelmingly positive to this. Not the fact that there's been a delay. Obviously, it's frustrating for many people, for many organisations, especially those that were working towards that first deadline and have committed resources in that space. We know that is a source of frustration for them, and we're talking regularly with them to help keep them up to date with what's happening. But the overwhelming response on the bigger picture side is that everybody thinks it's important that dashboards are done properly and dashboards are done well, and doing something well is more important than doing something quickly. And we think in order to give the best experience, not just to the industry when they come through the connection process, but also to the general public, to the savers when they start to access pensions dashboards, we need to make sure that it's done well. So in due course, there will be changes made by DWP to the regulations and the connection timeline, but that's still a work in progress at the moment. We're working through when that will be. What I can say is that as part of the written ministerial statement, the Minister for Pensions committed to come back to Parliament before recess, so that's probably before the second half of July, and we'll give an update on what the progress has been by the time we get to that stage. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we are stopping, that we're just kind of waiting around for something else to happen. We're working incredibly hard, both on the reset and on making sure that some of the important work that is already going on continues in the background. But that also means that actually the industry shouldn't be stopping either. Now, we know that the things that the industry really needs is consistency in the approach and some certainty about what it is they need to do and by when. Now, we can't provide the certainty at the moment, but we're certainly aiming to provide that consistency. And there is plenty of work that the industry can be doing to prepare. And in some instances, this could be seen as a bit of a bonus opportunity for the industry to have a little bit more time to do a lot of the work that they need to do in order to get ready, because it probably will come along rather quickly, that there will have to be some connections at some point, quicker than you. The kind of time always seems to creep up on you, doesn't it? It was even kind of just last year, it seemed to disappear very quickly. So I'm sure the next few months will go quickly as well. So it's important that the industry, all pension providers start to do that preparation or continue to do the work they've already started in preparation to make sure that when the new timelines are mentioned and published, that they are ready by their new connection date to be able to do that connection. And we've listed on the slide a number of different things that people can be doing mainly around cleansing and preparing data, interrogating and improving data accuracy, really importantly, developing an approach to matching, which is one of the kind of fundamental keys to success of pensions dashboards, is having the right data to allow individuals to find those pensions. And something that Richard touched on previously as well about selecting an approach to connection. I'm not going to go into that in any more detail because I know Angela is going to cover that as we go through. But just before I hand back to questions and then hand on to Angela, we will also be publishing a progress report at the end of this month and with a corresponding webinar in May. So there will be an opportunity to hear more from us as to where we are and to ask us further questions as well. We're always open to questions and contributions. And for those of you that don't already subscribe to our frequently asked questions newsletter or our general overall newsletter, please do. That's probably the best way to keep in touch with what's happening as we go through the process at the moment. But that's the update that I wanted to give, but very happy to take some questions.
Thanks very much, Chris. Very helpful, of course. And as you would have expected, we have got questions coming in on the timetable, and you've said quite a lot about what you can say at the moment about that. And I know that you said the minister is going to be coming back to Parliament before the recess, probably mid-July, with an update. And you've got a progress report out at the end of this month. But we have got questions on this, so I will just press you a little bit more if I can. Particularly one question here says, are we looking at 6 months, 12 months or longer? Can you give any sort of idea of what the likely sort of timeframes are going to be?
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't. I mean, if we could, I mean, we know what we're working towards. We've got the work that's going on as part of the reset is looking at where we are, what we've built, the results of some of the testing where we're going to be going next as part of that. So we do have kind of a sense, and I think one of the things to take away is that in the written ministerial statement, kind of there was kind of a reassurance that the framework generally, the bigger picture of how dashboards is being delivered is still the approach that the department will be taking. But what we don't want to do is to commit and give any indication that is then misleading. So we don't want to tell people, oh, we think it's going to be 6 months and it turns out to be 12, or we think it's going to be 12 months, so people put themselves on the back and it turns out to be 6. So really all I can do is ask people to bear with us as we go through the next few weeks to understand what we can do, and we will, as soon as we can, keep people abreast of what's happening and what's going to happen with the regulations, what's going to happen with the timeline, and when those staging windows will be.
Thanks, Chris. And we've got one other question. I might bring Richard back in at this point, actually, because Gordon Taylor sent us quite a long question, but I think essentially it boils down to the fact that schemes have got a huge number of other admin challenges going on at the moment, you know, GMPs, the transfer regs, dealing with scams, maybe preparing for buyout, the changes on the lifetime allowance, and so on. And he's asking, you know, are the sponsors of the dashboards program engaging with the administrators to understand what the impact of the reset and the delay is on them, and what is realistic to achieve from an admin perspective? Can we avoid what he calls timetable compression? Richard, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, thanks, James. Yes, so if the question is there engagement, the answer is yes. So for PACE, DWP, PDP, TPR, from a governmental and regulatory perspective, are engaging with industry bodies on exactly this question to say, you know, what would be the impacts of resetting at different times. We have at PLSA, if I come to PLSA first and then perhaps focus on administrators, at PLSA, we have reached out to our policy board, our 4 policy committees, and our dashboard specialist coordination group, which is selected from a range of PLSA members, from public sector schemes right through to DB/DC, master trusts and pension providers and lawyers. And we have put out some proposals, and we're discussing that, and we'll be responding on that informal dialogue to DWP and others as soon as possible. Specifically from administrators, and I agree with Gordon that this thing is key. This whole thing, administrators, salt of the earth. I'm an administrator. As I've said, I'm on the PLSA dashboards working group. I chair the Saver Experience subgroup, and Geraldine Brassett at Willis Towers Watson chairs the scheme configuration group, really helping schemes get ready. Tomorrow morning, I can say there is a call with government and regulator colleagues of that PLSA working group on this exact question, to say what would be the impacts of the potential different resets. So yes, I would say from my knowledge and experience, the policymakers and the sponsors of the programme are very alive to the fact of the impacts of this on industry as a whole, and specifically administrators.
Thanks, Richard. And just before we go on to Angela's presentation, I'm going to put one more last question about timing to Chris, if he can bear it, because Katie Harris says she's noting you can't give us any indication on timing, but are you able to give us any indication of how much notice will be given before the revised deadlines come into force?
Again, I can't be too specific on that, but we know that the industry will need time to get ready. I think one of the factors that we were taking into account was that we knew that we weren't going to be able to provide enough information early enough to allow the testing to happen, for example, and the testing needs to happen before we could go into the live connection and the mandatory staging timelines as we go through. So I can't give a precise indication, but it's an area that we are very, very cognizant of, and we're not going to be expecting people to be ready overnight. We know that even when we are ready and prepared and have all the materials that we need to give to the industry to allow them to then start their work, that they will then need time in order to then to restart their programs if they're not doing them the same way, or to update what they've been doing with the new information that we've given them, to get their testing prepared, to look at their connections and to work out everything that needs to happen. So there will be time given as part of that. But But when it comes to the kind of the regulatory time, again, that's something that will be part of the regulations, I think.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Chris. And I noticed what you said about using the opportunity of a bit of extra time to really prepare. So perhaps on that note, we should move on to Angela. I know she's got thoughts to share with us about what trustees and schemes should be doing now, etc. So Angela, over to you.
Thank you. And following on from Richard's and Chris's updates, it's important to highlight that connection is one piece of the dashboard's puzzle. And while, as we know, those connection deadlines are shifting, it's really super important that schemes don't down tools, so to speak. Excuse me. It's important to continue to focus attention on preparations, in particular around data. The change in connection deadlines are an opportunity, as Chris said, to get ahead of the game or to catch up if you were struggling to get ready in time. So if we could go on to my first slide. Thank you. So this slide highlights the 4 key calls to action that we're urging trustees to keep on top of. Firstly, find out, if you haven't already, what you need to do. Our guidance is a really good starting point. It includes a handy downloadable checklist that you can add your own columns to and use to track your progress. And while you might not yet know what your new connection deadlines will be, what you can do is to consider your options in terms of how you will connect if you haven't already done so, your route to connection, if you like, and decide what works best for your scheme. Using dashboards, including dashboards as an agenda item at your trustee and project boards, make sure that you can keep abreast of progress. So even if it's just a short update on the current position, so please do keep dashboards as a regular agenda item so that you can continue to drive that activity. Now, our main message at the moment is for schemes to use this time to look at the data that's going to be needed for dashboards. Don't leave this to the last minute and get caught up in the rush. There's a lot to do to prepare. So make sure you understand what needs to be done and put plans in place to take the actions that you need to. Many of you may have come along to a webinar that we recently held on this together with Kim Gubler of PLSA, so Pensions Administration Standards Association, that really delves into the detail of data and what's needed for dashboards. I'm going to touch on a number of the key points this morning, but for a more in-depth discussion, do take some time to listen to the recording, not just the key information, but also to hear some of the useful Q&As after the session. And you can download that on TPR's website, and I think a link to that's gone into the chat. So if we can forge ahead to the next slide. As I've said, connectability is clearly important, but it's data and the quality of that data that's ultimately going to determine the success of dashboards. And while data and the accuracy of that data is at the heart of dashboards, this is not just a dashboard issue. You need data to make sure you're paying the right person, the right pension at the right time. And having good data is vital for the smooth running of your scheme more generally. Making sure that you can accurately calculate your liabilities for a DB scheme, for example, or process core financial transactions promptly for a DC scheme. So what needs to be considered in terms of getting your data dashboard ready? Let's look at matching up savers first. What's important here? I mean, Richard touched on this. So just to reiterate, the dashboard system will provide you with certain data, some of which will be verified by an identity service, such as given name, date of birth, current address, and some data items which are self-asserted, so unverified information, such as national insurance number, previous address, previous last name, email address, mobile number, and so forth. You're going to need to decide which elements you're going to use to search your records. The decision you take needs to be based on your confidence in your specific scheme's data. Now, while PLSA has published some really useful guidance on matching conventions, including how to approach possible matches and also matching without national insurance numbers, which I really encourage you to consider, it's important to stress that how you match dashboard's request to your data has got to be dependent on the quality of your data. So in simple terms, if you're not confident in the quality of your national insurance numbers, you shouldn't use that to match. And it's really important you keep a record of your matching policy, which criteria you've chosen and why. The criteria that you use to match are also likely to change and evolve over time as your confidence in your data increases. So as the plans you put in place to enhance specific fields start to improve your data and your confidence grows, you may then choose to review your matching criteria so that that ratio of full and partial matching changes over time. Actually, talking about full and partial matches, I should highlight here that you're going to need to define two sets of data criteria. One for where you can be confident that you've made a full match and where you will then provide value information. And the other set of criteria is where you identify a possible match, but you need to confirm some of the detail. So, for example, you might have a Bell rather than Angela Bell in your records, or the date of birth or national insurance number are one digit off or two figures are transposed. Now, in cases like that, you would return a possible match and ask the user through the dashboard to make contact with you to confirm their details and achieve the confidence you need to confirm the match and then return the relevant value data. Another element to think about with matching is where you may have multiple sections of the scheme and where there may be discrepancies in the data quality for each of them. And it may then be suitable to have more than one set of matching criteria. So moving on to returning accurate value information. So once you've found your member, you're going to need to return certain administrative data immediately, such as the name of the scheme, the type of benefit, contact details, as well as some other information such as a link to costs and charges on your website. You're also going to need to include a unique identifier, which a saver can then use to retrieve the value data when they want. The value data is basically how much pension they've built to date and how much they are projected to have at retirement. What you need to provide depends on the benefit type. In most cases, you're going to need to provide both. There is actually a handy table on our website where you can see a bit more information on this. And along with the value data you provide is also some contextual data. And this is information which will help savers to make sense of what they see. So for example, what's the effective date of the value? Is that value going to increase in retirement? Is there a spouse's benefit attached? The value data you provide has got to meet certain rules for how it's calculated. For example, and Richard mentioned this at the beginning for a DC scheme, the calculations need to follow the FRC rules. So they need to be in line with ASTM1 rules, which are changing. So those changes have to be implemented. And for a DB scheme, the calculation needs to be in line with scheme rules. And it has to be sufficiently recent. So it can't be a value that might have been calculated at leaving, say 5, 6, 7 years ago. It's got to be from roughly the last 13 months. And the challenge with this is that schemes will only have a short time to provide the data. If you've provided it within the previous year, you need to provide that instantly. If not, you'll have 3 days to calculate for DC and 10 days for DB. So it's in your interest to talk to your administrators now about how much of this you might look to front load, to revalue in bulk, for example, or even automate, so that it's only a small number of cases that you have to calculate using that 3 and 10 day allowance, if you like. My final point here is that it's crucial that the data that you provide to dashboards is digitally accessible. So a PDF copy of an annual benefit statement or a scan of a letter with the value included won't work. It needs to be searchable and retrievable and provided in the format required. We do provide guidance on this, and I'd also like to flag some valuable guidance notes that PAS's Dashboard Working Group are shortly going to be publishing on good practice approaches to providing values, which are going to cover a number of different and quite nuanced areas. So I'd urge you to keep a lookout for that. If we can ping over to the next slide. I've included this slide more of a summary of the key steps to consider when getting your data dashboard ready. So understand what data you will receive and what you need to return. Assess what this means for your scheme and where your key challenges are likely to lie. Consider what data items you have more and less confidence in terms of setting the matching criteria for your scheme. And perhaps most importantly, number 4, what you need to do to improve and maintain your data quality. And I'm going to now move on to the final slide before opening to questions. And this is on our compliance and enforcement approach. So we've recently consulted on our compliance and enforcement approach, and we're currently going through the responses. Our final policy is, of course, going to be dependent on how the legislation changes, so we may need to revisit some of the specifics. But that said, our policy is as you would expect. It's risk-based and it's focused on member outcomes. The key aim is to encourage compliance rather than to apply a simple punitive approach. Any regulatory action we take will be targeted, measured, and evidence-based. We'll target our resources according to the level of risk and intervene only to the extent necessary to address the harm or reduce the risk. So what will we consider? We're going to consider elements like the nature and scale of the negative impact to the saver, which obviously remains at the heart of what we do. If a breach is the result of willful or reckless non-compliance, or if there are extenuating circumstances to consider. We'll look at compliance history of a scheme and any historic failures, as well as the duration of a breach. And also, of course, we're going to look at the consideration that's being given to PDPs and TPR's guidance. Our focus is very much on data quality, not only in finding members through matching, but also so that the saver can trust the information presented to them. Our focus is also on scheme governance. Robust internal governance will enable the scheme to identify issues and risks early so that they can put in place mitigations, and therefore it's a key aspect of ongoing compliance. That links, of course, to record keeping and audit trails to make sure that there's transparency in the system, and keeping a record of the key decisions that you make is really important. Third parties. We acknowledge that schemes will be highly dependent on third parties in order to comply with their duties, and we will consider using our powers against third parties where necessary. And again, this is where keeping a record of those key decision points that are made are really important. We do recognise the challenges that industry are facing, and we will be pragmatic and we will consider the circumstances of the breach. But, as the slide says, where we see intentional non-compliance, we will be robust. And finally, I just wanted to touch on some of the key risks for schemes to consider. And first of all, roles and responsibility. It's really important to be clear about the roles and responsibilities of those who are supporting you to meet your duties, so you can make sure there are no gaps in what you're providing. Another risk is not finding the member where you should. And the risk control here, I guess, it should be to set up that matching criteria according to your specific scheme's data quality. Have I said that enough? I might have done. Matching is key, and not matching where you should is also a breach. We expect you to apply possible matches. These are a really useful tool to help you to cleanse your data. Cyber risk is clearly another consideration, and once dashboards are live in the future, there is likely to be an increase in traffic to your call centres, so you need to have the right measures in place to deal with that. And poor record keeping is also a key risk. Schemes should be aware of the additional record keeping requirements that are brought by the dashboard and set up processes that enable you to monitor the quality. Data accuracy is so important, irrespective of your dashboard's duties. While dashboards are certainly going to shine a bright light on data, you should be looking to constantly improve and maintain the quality of your data in any case. I guess you can say it's the lifeblood of your scheme. And that brings me to a close, and I'll pass back to James, who's leading the Q&As.
Brilliant. Thank you, Angela. That's great. So we've got, 6 or 7 minutes left. So time to pack in, I think, a few more questions to any of our speakers. But Angela, one for you from Dan Trainer, who says, apologies if I've missed this point, but do you know when you're likely to publish the finalised compliance and enforcement policy?
I mean, we're pulling together the consultation responses at the moment. I think we've had over 50 of them. We're looking to publish those, our response, I think, later in the summer. And the actual policy will obviously be after that, and it needs to, obviously, the timing of that needs to work with everything else that's happening in the space.
Okay, later in the summer. Thanks, Angela. And there's a question from Peter Ainsworth, and this might again be one for Richard, actually. Peter asks, is there a concern that when it does go live, administrators will be hit with thousands of requests for quotes overnight? How will they cope with all those quotes? Is that how it's going to work, Richard?
So thanks, Peter, for the question. Great question. That indicates to me that perhaps at PLSA, we need to work a bit harder at explaining the way this is going to work. Angela mentioned that most ISPs won't be calculating figures on the hoof. They'll be returning stored values. So it's not a question of triggering quotes, if that makes sense. Now, some organizations may build functionality to have automatic calculations on the hoof, but I think that'll probably be the minority, although the ambition would be from government that more and more organizations move to real-time calculations in the fullness of time. But for now, the majority are going to be stored values. But I think I would say to Peter and all the audience, or any scheme, any trustee, you should be talking to your TPA and ISP about this, or rather they should be talking to you about what their service standard is going to be in terms of how they will be returning that data. Is it stored value? Do they plan to calculate it, etc., etc.?
Okay, thanks, Richard. And we've got a couple more questions at least. There's one from another anonymous attendee. Might be one for Richard, but if anyone wants to jump in, do. The question is, in PASA guidance for core data elements indicates that national insurance number is one of the mandatory core data elements. However, in the PDP data standard guidance, national insurance number is marked as optional as part of a find element. And we don't have a national insurance number as one of the mandatory data that users must enter as part of their personal information. I'm not quite sure who might want to comment on that.
I'll kick off and then pass to Chris maybe. So yeah, partly my fault, I wrote that guidance. So we went out to industry and said, what would you expect to match on? And the vast number of schemes and providers, administrators would expect to match on national insurance number, surname and date of birth. But that won't always be appropriate, as Angela has said. And if you haven't got good assurance of the quality of those three data elements, hence the need for looking at other data elements and other potential match policies. In testing so far, users do input their NI number. So even though it's not mandatory, it is there and it is available for matching. But Chris, I don't know if I could pass to you maybe in terms of saying something about the governmental aspect of about why it's not a mandatory input on the front end.
Yeah, I think that's right, Richard. There are two things I think I would mention here. One is that it's not an easily verifiable data item. So you don't really know if the national insurance number you've been provided with is actually the national insurance number that you should be matching. So that's a tricky one. I think in that instance, we also know that the data quality around national insurance number, especially in some workplace pension schemes, are not. It's not as high as it could be. Now that's something that could evolve over time and could be dealt with. So I think that there's something that might change. And finally, that there's also an accessibility point. So if people don't know their national insurance number, making it a mandatory item might mean that some people cannot access pensions dashboards, which is not something that we really want to do. Now, equally, I think, as Richard said, in testing, we found that quite strongly, and we actually are kind of testing ways to make it not quite mandatory, but almost mandatory, with heavy hints, and to try and do as much as we can to get people to put in their national insurance number, because we know it can be really helpful to have it. People have been using it as much as we can. So this is one of the areas that I think we will keep under review as we go through as well. And as Richard said, user testing is really important, and we will continue to user test and learn the lessons from that testing and implement them where we can.
Thanks, Chris. And let's squeeze in one last question from Gordon Taylor, who wins a prize for sending in 2 questions. Gordon says, could or should we enlist members in checking data accuracy? And he sets out a possible approach where you put the matching data on a secure member e-portal, invite members to sign up to that, and get them to review the data and confirm accuracy or amend it. And he says this could be a win in terms of overall data accuracy, and Angela was really stressing the importance of that. Does that sound like a viable and useful approach? I don't know if perhaps Angela wants to comment on that from the sort of data quality point of view.
Yes, I mean, I guess my take on that is that there's a lot that trustees and scheme managers can be doing to cleanse the data that they already have in their systems. So I think that would be the starting place. I mean, if they are, for example, their matching conventions are going to focus on surname, date of birth, and national insurance number, for example, they could put in place some activity to actively go out to members to ask them to confirm that the data that they hold is correct. But whether I don't think that the information that is received through the dashboard registration process can be used in that way. In terms of ICO use for it, needs to be used in order to find the member. So whether that information can be used directly to instantly cleanse data, I think could well be a breach of ICO rules.
Okay, thanks, Angela. I think we're going to have to draw matters towards a close there. Apologies, there is one last question from Jenny Wood, which we've not had a chance to answer. So perhaps Richard, you and I could have a look at that afterwards and see if we can ping an answer out to Jenny. But thank you very much to all three speakers, to Angela, Chris and Richard. You've done a great job in giving us an update and answering a lot of questions too. So thank you. And thanks also to my colleagues beavering away behind the scenes, making all this happen. Molly, Rebecca, Cheryl, Nicolina, who did all the registrations, wouldn't happen without them. So we will circulate the slides, the recordings. There'll be a feedback form as well. Do please fill that in. It's very useful to us. It will be particularly useful to have our members guidance on what more you want us to do on dashboards. Should we be doing another webinar in the summer, in the autumn? We'll certainly do something at annual conference, publishing more guidance. Give us a steer perhaps on what would work best for you. And don't forget, please, to register for our future conferences. Remember the investment conference in Edinburgh, our local authority conference at the end of June in the Cotswolds, and our annual conference in Manchester in October. Otherwise, thank you again to our speakers. Thank you to everyone who's dialed in, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.